I ran into my ex-husband and his mistress. At the Women and Infants Hospital, of all places, for a pregnancy checkup. They insulted me. "What are you doing here? Someone as barren as you doesn't belong here." 10 minutes later, they were in for a shock. I always thought that one day I would walk into this hospital as a doctor, not a patient. But that morning, I chose to wear my simplest clothes. A worn-out white shirt that was starting to feel loose at the waist, black trousers, and a mask that covered most of my face. No white coat, no ID badge, no doctor's glasses, just Amelia, a 3-year-old woman who, in her ex-husband's eyes, had failed at being a mother. My steps were slow as I entered the lobby of Hope Valley Women and Infants Hospital. This place should have felt like a second home to me because, in reality, it was. But today, I came as a patient, wanting to find out why my monthly cycle had been erratic for the past few months. I wasn't scared. I just wanted an objective answer, without my identity getting in the way. I clutched the results of the basic tests I had already undergone. My hand was a little cold. Not from nervousness, but because I knew that whatever truth came out today would be a new door in my life. A chime echoed from the elevator. The doors slid open, and the world froze. Ethan stepped out first, his stride quick and his chest puffed out, as he always did when he felt like the most important man in the room. Beside him, their hands were intertwined. Jessica walked with a small, forced smile. One hand cradled her barely there bump, deliberately pushed out to look more prominent. The belly she was always so proud of on social media. The belly she had used as a reason to destroy my marriage. Jessica stopped as soon as she saw me. Then, as if she had a script prepared in her head, she uttered the words she had long wanted to throw in my face. "What are you doing here, Amelia?" Her voice was sharp and loud, intended for the other patients around us to hear. She took a step forward, her chin tilted up. The hand on her belly moved to her hip, as if to further emphasize her new status. "Someone as barren as you," she repeated the phrase more slowly, making sure every syllable pierced my ears, "doesn't belong in a women and infants hospital. You'll bring bad luck to the other patients?" Ethan stood beside her, saying nothing, not even trying to de-escalate. He just looked down slightly, a small smile on his face. The same smile he had when he laughed at me years ago after I failed yet another pregnancy test. A few patients turned their heads. Some whispered to each other. A motherly-looking woman gave me a pitying look. Others judged me without knowing a thing about my life. I took a slow breath. Not a single one of Jessica's words hurt me today. Not like they used to. I even found it slightly amusing. I looked at them both from behind my mask. My gaze was calm, flat, without anger, just a measured coldness. In that case, my voice remained soft, but this time it was colder than steel. "We'll just see who really belongs here." Jessica snorted loudly. Ethan looked away. I was about to walk on when a senior nurse passed us. She glanced at me, and her eyes softened with something that was almost respect. But I gave her a subtle signal with my eyes, a slight downward look, asking her to pretend she didn't know me. She understood. She always did. I continued walking toward the obstetrics and gynecology wing. Behind me, I heard Jessica say to Ethan, just loud enough for me to hear on purpose, "It's so sad." Still hoping for a baby when her womb is clearly the problem, I paused for a moment. Not because her words struck a nerve, but because the irony of the situation was almost comical, considering I handled more cases of problematic uteruses than anyone else in this hospital. Suddenly, a voice from the receptionist speaker called out, "Amelia Hayes, please proceed to Dr. Peterson's office." I turned slightly. Ethan and Jessica looked at me, confused. "She's seeing Dr. Peterson too?" Jessica whispered, not realizing her voice was loud enough for me to hear. I didn't say anything, just walked slowly down the long corridor, past the educational posters about fertility that I had designed myself. Posters they were now reading, oblivious to who created them. The corridor felt colder than usual. White lights illuminated the polished floor. The sound of patients' footsteps echoed. The smell of antiseptic mixed with the faint scent of expectant mothers' perfumes. At the end of the hall, the door to Dr. Peterson's consultation room was slightly ajar as nurses moved in and out with patient files. I stood in front of the door. A nurse gave me a small nod, a gesture understood only by those who knew who I really was. I entered. Dr. Peterson's office was, as usual, tidy, with soft lighting and the scent of peppermint he favored. On a shelf behind him, several medical awards were neatly displayed. A thick file lay on his desk. I had just sat down when there was a soft knock on the door. Dr. Peterson entered with a warm expression, like a father calming his child. But today, there was something different in his eyes, a mixture of seriousness and respect. He sat down, opened a file, then spoke in a voice deliberately loud enough for anyone outside the door to hear. "Miss Hayes," he paused for a moment. As the lead specialist and majority shareholder of this hospital, the sentence hit the air like a lightning bolt in the quiet room. I remained silent. Ethan, who happened to be walking by, stopped right in front of the door. I could see the shadow of his body through the crack of the door that wasn't fully closed. Jessica, from her seat in the waiting area, immediately turned her head. Dr. Peterson continued, his voice firmer. "I think it's time you heard the real results of your and your husband's examinations." My hands relaxed in my lap. I nodded slowly, and in the reflection of a small mirror on the side of the desk, I saw Ethan standing rigidly, his hand gripping the door handle, like someone who had just realized he had been living with a truth he never understood. Dr. Peterson opened the first file. I could hear my own heartbeat, not because I was afraid of the results, but because I knew this was the beginning of everything turning around. And just as the doctor was about to start explaining, a sound came from outside the room. The sound of Ethan holding his breath, caught on the threshold. It was as if my entire past, the humiliation, the slander, the rejection, the pain was preparing to change direction. The door to the room was still slightly ajar from the nurse carrying patient files, and that small gap became a window for Ethan to hear something he had never imagined during our life together. "Doctor." Peterson adjusted his glasses, then looked at me with a body language that could only be read by someone who had long known my integrity. There was a note of caution there, not because he was afraid someone outside would hear, but because he knew that once this truth was spoken, my life and the lives of those who had belittled me would never be the same. "Miss Hayes," he said softly but clearly, "I have reviewed all of your examination results, as well as the results of your husband that we conducted a few months ago." I gave a small nod, without excessive emotion. Just waiting, the way a doctor waits for objective results, without drama. Dr. Peterson glanced briefly toward the door. I knew he was aware someone was listening, but he let it be. He opened the first file, the one with my name on it. "First," he said, pushing the result sheet toward me, "overall, your condition is normal. Hormones are balanced, ovarian function is good, the last ultrasound showed no abnormalities, and all your fertility indicators are within a healthy range." I felt a warmth spread through my chest. Not because I was surprised I had known this for a long time, but because hearing it again in this room, in this situation, felt like a powerful blow to all the insults I had ever received. Outside the door, I heard Ethan's breathing become uneven. He probably couldn't believe his own ears. Jessica, who had been sitting not far from the door, was now standing, half peeking in. Her face was tense. Dr. Peterson opened the second file, the one with Ethan's name printed clearly on the front. He looked at me first, then spoke in a firmer tone, still deliberately not lowering his voice. And regarding Mr. Collins' results, he took a breath and shook his head slightly. "I think you need to hear everything clearly, with nothing held back." Ethan finally pushed the door open a little wider, and his body became visible. He pretended he was just passing by, but his nervous expression told a different story. "Mr. Collins, doctor," Peterson said politely, but without giving him a chance to evade, "you might as well come in. I see you've been listening from outside." Ethan froze. Jessica stared from the waiting area, her mouth slightly open, not expecting her morning script to change so drastically. I turned toward Ethan. My voice was quiet but sharp. "Come in, Ethan." Better than hearing half-truths. He entered with stiff steps, sitting in the chair next to mine but maintaining a distance, as if I were a dangerous object. Dr. Peterson laid out Ethan's results. His voice was firm. "In your examination, we see several very concerning parameters: low sperm count, poor motility, and several quality indicators that do not meet normal standards. This is what we call male factor infertility. Ethan immediately raised his voice, almost a reflex from someone feeling cornered. "That's wrong, Doc. I'm healthy. There's no way I have a problem." His voice trembled. "Besides," he swallowed, then forced out the flawed sentence, "the proof is that my girlfriend is pregnant now." Jessica, who had been peeking, walked right in and stood beside Ethan, holding her stomach while lifting her chin. "That's right, Doc. I'm the proof." Her smile was cynical, so clearly the problem isn't with Ethan, but with her. Her finger pointed at me. I just looked at her, my expression flat. Dr. Peterson sighed, looking at them alternately. "Actually, on that matter, I've also just seen Miss Vance's examination results." Jessica's expression cracked. Ethan looked at the doctor, confused and uneasy. Dr. Peterson turned the ultrasound monitor toward the three of us. "The gestational age shown on the ultrasound just now doesn't match the last date of intercourse that Miss Vance mentioned." Jessica flinched. What do you mean, doctor?" "We're talking about a discrepancy of several weeks. It's too far off to be considered a simple mistake." Dr. Peterson's tone did not soften. "And besides that, there's a history of an infection that only recently healed a few months ago. Medically, it's not easy to reconcile all of this without complete honesty." It felt as if the air in the room had solidified. Ethan looked at me as if just realizing a possibility he had been suppressing himself. Maybe I wasn't the barren one. Maybe I wasn't the one at fault. Maybe all his insults toward me were a reflection of his own fears. Jessica forced a bitter smile. "Doc, maybe I just misremembered the date, right?" "It's possible, Miss Vance," Dr. Peterson cut in smoothly but firmly. "But if the date of intercourse was wrong, why is the date of the initial symptoms also out of sync? Why is the HCG level unstable? Why do your medical records show a pattern inconsistent with a healthy pregnancy?" Ethan looked increasingly pale. Jessica became more aggressive, her tone sharp. "So you're saying I'm lying? Is that it, doctor?" Peterson didn't answer, but his gaze was clear enough. I leaned back in my chair, looking at them both without speaking, without defending myself. They didn't deserve my defense. Not anymore. The notification sound on my phone chimed. A message from Miss Collins. "Dr. Hayes, about the shareholder meeting tomorrow. If you'd like, we can invite Mr. Collins as a surprise guest." I smiled faintly. Ethan saw that smile, and his body tensed as if his instincts knew something bad was approaching. I stood up slowly from my chair, looking Ethan straight in the eye. "All this time, you insulted me." My quiet voice felt like a cold incision. "And yet you knew nothing about me. Not about my body, not about my work, not about my life." Ethan laughed a little, a nervous, broken laugh. "Yeah, right. You were just a regular housewife, Amelia." I looked at him for a long moment, then replied slowly, without emotion, without anger. "And that's what made my words cut the deepest. We'll see just how long you can maintain that lie." Ethan swallowed hard. Jessica fell silent. "Doctor." Peterson closed his eyes for a moment, as if preparing for the coming storm, a storm they had created themselves. And as I walked out of that room, everyone's eyes followed me. Not looks of pity, not looks of condescension, but the looks of people who were beginning to realize, however faintly, that the woman they had just insulted was no ordinary woman. I walked out of Dr. Peterson's office with deliberate steps, not because I was weak, but because I was holding back something bigger than anger or sadness, something called the truth, which I had let lie dormant for so long to protect the pride of a man who hadn't even tried to respect me. The hospital corridor felt longer than usual. The fluorescent lights reflected off the gleaming tile floors, the quiet squeak of a wheelchair, the muffled conversations of patients. But in my head, fragments of the past resurfaced, one by one. It all started a few months ago, when I decided to seek a scientific answer about my own body. I remember that day clearly. I didn't come to this hospital. I chose another one where no one knew me as the owner, no one knew me as a specialist, only as Amelia, a patient wanting a fertility check. I sat in the waiting room then, staring at the long list of infertility tests. A full hormone panel, a transvaginal ultrasound, a reproductive health exam, and of course, a semen analysis for the partner. Ethan had complained when I asked him to get tested. "If you want to get checked, just go, Amelia." "Why do I have to?" "It's obvious the problem is with you." A smile that held back. A long explanation about how infertility factors can come from both partners. But I knew it was useless explaining to someone who preferred to judge rather than listen. Finally, whether out of a desire to avoid a fight or just to get it over with, Ethan went along, with an expression like I'd just assigned him a monumental task. A few days later, the results came in. I sat in front of a senior doctor at that hospital. He didn't know my identity. He didn't know that I performed similar examinations in my own practice. He didn't know I had a subspecialty in fertility. He only knew I was a woman who wanted to have a child. "Miss Hayes," he said, looking at my lab results. "Overall, your condition is excellent. There are no significant structural or hormonal abnormalities." I nodded slowly. Then the doctor opened the file containing Ethan's test results. His tone changed. "For Mr. Collins, there are several very low parameters: count, motility, and morphology. The conditions are not ideal for conception. In fact, they're quite severe." I still remember how that doctor looked at me, as if preparing to be a shoulder for a wife who had just discovered her husband was infertile. He didn't know. I wasn't the type of woman to cry in public. I just clasped my fingers, took a small breath, and replied, "Okay, doctor, thank you." He seemed surprised by my composure. If I weren't me, maybe I would have fallen apart that day. If I weren't a doctor, maybe I would have blamed myself. If I weren't Amelia, the woman who had built all of this with her own hands, maybe I would have given up. But I just put the file in my bag, walked out, looked up at the blue sky in the parking lot, and thought, should I tell Ethan? The answer came quickly. No. Because I knew what his reaction would be. And I was right. When he picked up his lab results from the receptionist a few days later, his attitude only worsened. In the car, he slammed the door and said without looking at me, "So what about your results? Your womb is messed up, right?" He hadn't opened his file. He hadn't read the reality that he had been blaming me for, when I was the healthiest one in our home. A few nights after that, he came home late, smelling of a perfume I didn't recognize. His face was different, more confident, more arrogant, more distant. That was the first time I felt something had truly shifted in our marriage. And again, I stayed silent. I held it in. I stored that truth in the deepest place. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to give him one last chance to be honest with himself. A chance he threw away without a second thought. The hospital corridor I was walking down now felt increasingly quiet as that flashback ended in my head. I finally stopped at a small vending machine near the waiting area. I needed some water to clear my thoughts. As I inserted a coin, I heard quick footsteps approaching. Footsteps I recognized, filled with impatience and ego. "Amelia," Ethan called, his voice heavy and strained. I turned. His face was pale, his lips trembling slightly. What was that explanation back there? He was trying to sound forceful, but he sounded out of breath. "Why did that doctor say you're a shareholder, an expert doctor? You lied to me." I took the water bottle from the machine, opening it slowly. "Ethan," I said, my voice soft but cold, "there are a lot of things you don't know about my life." Ethan's face turned red with a mix of anger and shame. "Why did you hide your identity? What do you think I am? Huh? A puppet? Why did you pretend to be an ordinary wife?" I stared at him for a long time. Stared at the man who had once promised to love me in any condition, but instead loved a version of me he wanted, not the person I truly was. My answer came slowly, but each word stabbed directly into the heart of his ego. Because I wanted to be loved, without a title, without a position, without money. I took a sip of water. Turns out, I misjudged who was capable of that. Ethan gritted his teeth. You think you can win like this? By speaking up in front of that doctor? I smiled faintly. This is just the beginning. Ethan froze, and before he could respond, a notification chimed from his phone. A text from Jessica. Honey, the doctor said there was something weird in my results. What was he talking about? I'm scared. A little frowny face emoji. Ethan read the message, then looked at me again. This time, it wasn't just anger. There was fear in his eyes. The fear of someone who had just realized his position was starting to crumble. See you tomorrow, I said, walking past him. There happens to be an important meeting. I'm sure you'll want to be there. I could feel his body tense as I passed. Because for the first time in his life, Ethan knew he was facing someone whose power far exceeded anything he had ever imagined about me. I didn't need to threaten. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to return his insults. The truth was moving on its own, and that alone was more than enough to make him tremble. The waiting room of the Ob-Gyn clinic was busy. Yet there was a silence so fragile it felt like it could shatter at any moment. Patients were engrossed in their own worlds, rubbing their bellies, clutching lab results, speaking softly with their partners. But the atmosphere around me was completely different. There was an electricity in the air, a tension I could almost pluck with my fingertips. Ethan was still standing in the corridor, his face like someone who had just been hit by reality from all directions. Jessica sat nervously in a waiting chair, hugging her stomach while repeatedly checking her phone screen. Occasionally, she would glance at me and quickly look away, as if afraid to meet her own reflection. I didn't care. I had given them space to poison my life for too long. A nurse called Jessica's name to go in for a follow-up ultrasound. She stood up, fixed her hair, and looked at Ethan, who was searching for a place to lean, as if the hospital walls could support all his lies. 5 minutes later, Jessica came out again. Her face was pale, her eyes fearful, and the ultrasound folder hung loosely in her hand. I knew that look. I had seen it on dozens of patients, but never on someone as arrogant as Jessica. She didn't dare approach Ethan. Maybe she knew something from that ultrasound could bury the pride she had been parading for so long. Soon after, a nurse knocked on Dr. Peterson's door. Doctor, the next patient is ready. Dr. Peterson invited me, Ethan, and Jessica to sit. The room felt smaller than before. The usually calming scent of peppermint now felt sharp. He sat down slowly, placing both files in front of him. There are a few things that need to be clarified, he said, his voice gentle but clear. And it's best we are all in this room for it. Ethan swallowed. Jessica gripped her stomach tighter. Dr. Peterson opened the first file. Ethan's file. Let's start with Mr. Collins's results, he stated. The parameters for sperm count, motility, and quality are all below the normal range. In medical terms, this is known as male factor infertility. Ethan immediately shot back. That's a lie. His voice was loud. I'm healthy, Doc. We do not falsify lab results, sir, doctor, Peterson replied firmly. And this isn't a new result. This is from the examination done several months ago when Dr. Hayes was still your legal partner. Jessica looked at Ethan, her eyes wide. Several months ago? Ethan, you were tested? Her voice trembled. Ethan averted his gaze, panic starting to take over his face. Dr. Peterson then opened the second file, containing Jessica's new ultrasound and physical exam results. Now, regarding Miss Vance. The room went quiet, utterly silent. Even the sound of a nurse's shoes in the hallway couldn't be heard. Dr. Peterson turned the ultrasound monitor. The black and white image looked cold and honest. The gestational age seen here is not consistent with the date of conception you mentioned earlier. Jessica straightened her back. Maybe I just remembered the date wrong, Doc. It's not just about the date. Dr. Peterson's tone sharpened. The HCG hormone levels we took this morning are fluctuating, unstable. For a pregnancy at this stage, the values should be increasing consistently. Jessica's eyes widened, her face turning panicked. It's because I was tired, Doc. I walked a lot today. Dr. Peterson shook his head slowly. He looked at them both with the gaze of a doctor who had seen patient lies far too often. We also found a history of a chronic infection in Miss Vance's medical records. A condition like that makes it difficult to conceive easily. Usually, patients with such a history require more time. Ethan turned drastically pale. Jessica started speaking faster. "Doc, I'm really pregnant. I used a home test. It was positive." "Positive, Doc?" Dr. Peterson steepled his fingers on the desk. "Home pregnancy tests can give false positives if—" "Don't tell me I'm lying," Jessica cut him off, her voice a half scream. Ethan tried to calm her. "Jessica, stop it. People will hear." Jessica shoved Ethan's hand away. Her eyes were teary with a panic of her own making. "I'm pregnant, Ethan. I'm pregnant with your child. Are you just going to leave me like that?" Ethan was speechless. The man who was used to building his life on praise and lies was suddenly losing his footing. He looked fragile, even pathetic. "Then, Doctor," Peterson closed both files with one decisive move. "I am not accusing anyone," he said softly. "I am simply presenting the objective medical findings." He then looked at me. His gaze was full of respect and unspoken support. And as a specialist and the majority shareholder of this hospital, Dr. Hayes has the right to know the complete truth of this case. Jessica looked at me, shocked. Ethan froze, like someone who just realized he had tried to underestimate someone far beyond his reach. I took a slow breath and spoke without raising my voice, which made my words cut even deeper. "All this time, the two of you have been shouting the loudest, calling me barren, yet you never looked at anything with open eyes." Ethan clenched his fists. "Amelia, don't start playing games." "I'm not playing," I cut in calmly. "The medical truth speaks for itself, and tomorrow, another truth will follow." Jessica frowned in panic. "Tomorrow? What's tomorrow?" I sighed, looking at them one by one. "Tomorrow, there's an important meeting on the top floor. If you want to know who really doesn't belong in a women and infants hospital," I mimicked Jessica's insult with a very gentle tone, "feel free to come." Ethan tensed. He knew that tone. It was the threatening tone of a woman who didn't need to shout to bring him down. Jessica grabbed Ethan's arm, whispering frantically, "Ethan, what does she want? Why is she talking like that?" Ethan was silent. For the first time since I'd known him, he was truly at a loss for words. I stood up, picked up my bag, adjusted my mask, and gave Dr. Peterson a brief look. "Thank you, Doctor." He bowed his head respectfully. As I walked out, the images of Ethan and Jessica were left far behind, even though they were still sitting in that room. Because today, for the first time in their lives, they realized they had insulted someone they should have never touched. I walked toward the elevator with a steady gait, though a nervous energy from the earlier confrontation still lingered in the air. The scent of antiseptic mixed with the smell of coffee from the ground floor cafeteria. But nothing was more piercing than the memory of Jessica's expression when Dr. Peterson mentioned the inconsistent gestational age. Not because I cared about her pregnancy, but because, for the first time, their faces reflected the fear they had so deliberately inflicted upon me. The elevator chimed. As the doors opened, Miss Collins stepped out, carrying a few files. She froze upon seeing me in simple clothes. "Not the white coat, Dr. Hayes?" Her voice dropped softly, full of caution. "Is everything all right?" I nodded, signaling for her to be quiet and not mention my position. She understood. She always did. We exchanged a knowing look without words. "Tomorrow morning's meeting is all set," she whispered, handing me a small folder. "And the surprise guest is also on the list." There was a small smile on her face, not a smug or arrogant smile, but one of understanding that what needed to be settled would, indeed, be settled. I took the folder without opening it. I would open it all tomorrow, in the proper place. As I took another step, I heard quick footsteps behind me. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. "Amelia!" Ethan called out loudly. He sounded panicked, like someone trying to catch something falling off a cliff. I stopped. Ethan stood a few feet away from me. His face no longer radiated superiority. There was sweat on his temples. His breathing was heavy. Jessica was a step behind him, clutching her stomach with a look of dread, yet still trying to appear victorious. I waited. Ethan swallowed hard. His voice was broken. "So, this is what you meant? Huh?" He pointed toward Dr. Peterson's office door. "You deliberately set me up? Set Jessica up?" I turned my head slightly, looking at him only from the corner of my eye. "Ethan, I never set anyone up," I said quietly. "I just came as a patient. The rest, you did to yourselves." His face grew redder, not from anger, but from shame. "What that doctor said earlier about my results, it's wrong. I don't believe it." I stepped closer to him. Jessica tensed as she saw me approach, as if I were carrying something that was about to explode. I wasn't carrying anything. What was exploding was their own lie. I spoke quietly, sharply, each word measured. "When was the last time you truly asked what was happening with my body?" Ethan was speechless. I continued. "When was the last time you cared about the results of the tests I underwent?" He tried to speak, but his voice was choked. "When was the last time you saw yourself as part of the process and not a judge presiding from afar?" Ethan started to open his mouth, but no words came out. Jessica took half a step forward, her small voice sharp. "This is all your fault, Amelia. You're jealous because I'm pregnant with Ethan's child. I gave her a sharp look, so sharp that she shut her mouth. "Jessica," I said, my voice soft but cold, "you heard what the doctor said. Your HCG is unstable. The gestational age doesn't match. And there's a history of a recently healed infection." Her face turned pale. I moved a little closer, my voice almost a whisper. "So now I'm asking you, whose child are you actually claiming is his?" Jessica gasped, holding her breath like someone drowning. Ethan turned his face away as if he couldn't bear to hear that question again. I just miscalculated, got the date wrong." "No, sweetie," I cut in gently. "The date isn't what's wrong. What's wrong is your audacity to slander someone you thought was weak." Jessica took a shaky breath, trying to retort. "You're jealous. You're envious. I shook my head. "I'm not envious of a lie, Jessica. I'm just waiting for the truth to come out on its own." Then I delivered the line that made them both shiver. "And tomorrow, you'll know a truth that's bigger than just a lab result." Ethan flinched. "What do you mean, Amelia? Don't create drama." I didn't answer. I just looked at the clock on the wall. It was almost evening. I had to go home. I walked past them. Just as we were a few feet apart, my phone vibrated. A new email notification from the hospital's legal department. "All legal documents regarding share ownership are ready for tomorrow morning's presentation." I closed my phone without reacting. But Ethan saw the cold glint in my eye, and his body weakened. He knew tomorrow would not be a good day for him. As I entered the elevator, the doors closed slowly. And through the final crack before they shut completely, I saw Jessica holding her stomach, her head bowed. Ethan stood like a man who had lost his entire future in a single morning. As for me, I was only thinking one thing. Tomorrow was the day they would finally see who the woman they called Baron really was. Amelia, doctor, specialist, owner. And someone who never played dirty, she just let the truth speak for itself. A truth that had only just begun to emerge that morning. The sky above the hospital was clear, almost pristine. Unlike the feeling in my chest or in the 8th floor conference room, which was preparing to welcome the small storm named Ethan. I arrived early, wearing a white coat, not to show off, but to show my true self. For the first time in years, I wasn't hiding, no longer playing the part of a simple wife with nothing to her name. "Miss," Collins greeted me at the glass door of the conference room. The meeting room was already set up. A long, dark wood table, a row of laptops, bottles of mineral water, and folders with the meeting agenda. The shareholders were already seated. Several senior doctors nodded respectfully as I passed. The head seat was at the center of the table. A chair I had never officially occupied, but in reality, was mine. Liam was already there. He wore a dark shirt and a formal blazer. His expression was calm but sharp. His gaze caught my movement, and a slight, warm smile appeared. Not one of sympathy, but of respect. He gave a small gesture as if to say, Today, stand as you're meant to. I sat in that head seat, and for some reason, it felt right. It felt like a place that had long been waiting for my return. A few minutes later, the door opened. Ethan walked in like someone called for a job interview he desperately wanted. He wore a new shirt. His hair was neatly combed. His cologne was overpowering. His stride was confident, even arrogant. He had no idea he was walking into a place that was never his territory. He saw me, and his step faltered slightly. I could see him processing my white coat, my position at the table, the directors nodding at me, and the voice in his head starting to scream that something was wrong. Amelia, he said, trying to smile though his face was tense. You work here? In what department? I didn't answer. Miss Collins stood up and tapped the small microphone in front of her. All right, the meeting will now begin. For our new guest, allow me to introduce the core leadership of this hospital. Ethan immediately lifted his chin, trying to appear confident. He thought he was about to be introduced as a business partner. First, Miss Collins said in a firm voice, seated in the center, is Dr. Amelia Hayes, MD, FACOG, our majority shareholder and one of the principal architects behind the founding of Hope Valley Women and Infants Hospital. Ethan froze. I heard his breath catch. In the next second, his face, which always radiated arrogance, was suddenly blank, pale. Liam just looked at him like someone watching a drama whose ending he had predicted from the start. One of the directors added, "She is the best fertility specialist we have. Without her contributions, this hospital would not have grown as it has." Ethan looked left and right, as if searching for a hidden camera, then looked at me again. "Amelia, what is this? You're a doctor? A specialist? A shareholder? You've been lying to me for years." I looked at him, my expression flat. "No," I answered calmly. "You never asked, and I never felt the need to explain myself to someone who never wanted to know anything beyond himself." Ethan turned red. "But you live so simply." "Simple is not the same as having nothing." My voice was quiet, but it made a few people at the table suppress a small smile. Ethan was silent, completely silent, like someone who had just realized he had never truly known the woman he married. Miss Collins continued the meeting as if the incident with Ethan was just a minor interruption. First on the agenda, the development of a new branch, to be presented by Dr. Hayes and Mr. Knight. I pressed a button on the table. The large monitor screen lit up. The opening slide of the presentation appeared a project I had been working on in secret. But before I could speak, Ethan forced himself to stand and said loudly, I want to speak. I am a potential partner for this hospital. I was invited for a collaboration." The directors exchanged glances. "Well," Ethan smiled awkwardly, Miss Collins mentioned. "There was an opportunity for an insurance partnership. I was contacted by a hospital representative." Miss Collins stood up again. "I'm sorry, Mr. Collins." Her tone was polite but full of firm boundaries. "There may have been a misunderstanding. We did invite you, but not for a partnership discussion." Ethan froze. Then what for?" The room went silent. Miss Collins looked at me, signaling whether I wanted to be the one to say it. I nodded slowly. I took a breath and then spoke. "You are here to hear directly that this hospital will not collaborate with anyone associated with scandal, verbal abuse, and an affair involving a patient." Ethan was taken aback. "What do you mean?" His voice rose. I looked straight at him, without anger. That's what made him seem even smaller. "Ethan, your affair with an outside patient isn't just a personal matter. It tarnishes the name of this institution, and I will not allow this hospital's name to be used to boost the reputation of someone who doesn't even know the basic ethics of a relationship." Ethan glanced at the directors. His face was panicked. He felt all eyes were judging him. "This is slander!" he shouted. "You're just listening to her." To my ex-wife, the word was almost out, but he held it back, realizing he was in the wrong room to speak so recklessly. Liam leaned forward slightly. His voice was low but sharp. "I would advise you not to use that word again, not here, and not in front of doctors who know far more than you do." Ethan gritted his teeth, angry but unable to retaliate. I leaned back a little, twirling a pen in my fingers. "Ethan, You weren't invited as a potential partner. You were invited so you would know that all the doors you thought would open a path for you are now closed." Ethan gasped, his eyes red with anger and shame. "I don't accept this." "It's not about whether you accept it," Miss Collins cut in. "This is an institutional decision." The meeting continued. Ethan stood there like a stranger. There was no chair for him, no place for him. He was no longer a part of anything happening that day. And just before he walked out of the room, Liam added one final small sentence. Quiet, but it stung like a blade. "Next time, have some respect for the woman you underestimate." Ethan left with a shaky stride. But I knew this was just the beginning of his downfall. I just looked at the presentation screen, hiding the turmoil in my chest. Not arrogant, not proud, just calm. Because something bigger was waiting. The meeting was still long, but Ethan's life was much longer. And today, he had just walked through a door that would never open for him again. The 8th floor conference room was still filled with the sounds of rustling paper, the clicking of laptops, and discussions among the directors. But to me, those sounds were distant, muffled by one reality. Ethan stood at the door, his eyes red, his breathing heavy, and a shame he tried to hide behind a facade of strength. But nothing could be hidden from the people in that room. Not today, not after the truth he himself had rejected for years suddenly exploded in his face. When the meeting about the new branch opening concluded, I closed my presentation and took a sip of water. The atmosphere was calm, professional, normal, the complete opposite of the panic that enveloped Ethan. He was still standing, trembling but trying to look dignified. "Amelia?" His voice was hoarse. "We can talk, just the two of us." I didn't turn around. I organized my folders, tidied up my papers, and then said calmly, "There's nothing left to talk about." Ethan stepped deeper into the room. "But you embarrassed me in front of everyone. What do you think I am?" "Huh?" Liam, who had been sitting on the right side of the table, lifted his face. There was a cold glint in his eyes, the look of a man not afraid to stand up to anyone. "Mr. Collins," he said, his tone polite but firm, "it's unethical to disrupt an internal meeting. This is a professional forum, not a family drama." Ethan turned with a hostile glare. "Who are you to interfere? Huh? Her lawyer? Her boyfriend? Or what?" "An investor in this hospital," Liam replied flatly, "and someone who respects Dr. Hayes as both a colleague and a person." Ethan's gaze faltered, cornered by a simple fact. In this room, not a single person was on his side. Miss Collins stood up. "All right," she said, cutting in. "Before we move to the next agenda item, I'd like to convey the board's decision regarding Mr. Collins's status." Ethan tensed. The entire room fell silent, listening. "Considering the records we have received about your relationship with an outside patient, the incident of insulting one of our core shareholders, and the potential conflict of interest," Miss Collins looked directly at him. "All forms of cooperation, proposals, and access to hospital facilities under your name are permanently terminated, effective today." Ethan took a step back. "What? You can't do that." "I can," Miss Collins cut in firmly. "And it has been decided." Ethan turned to me, his eyes blazing. "So this is your doing, isn't it? You deliberately made me look bad, deliberately made me lose a business opportunity. You're getting revenge because you're—" I looked him straight in the eye, not flustered, not yelling, but there was a subtle power in my voice. "Ethan," I whispered, "I didn't have to ruin anything. You did it yourself. Everything that's happening is a consequence of your own choices." His face fell, his lips trembled. "But I did all of that because I thought you were just an ordinary wife. You." He stopped, his voice breaking. "You never saw me," I replied softly. "Even when I was with you every single day." Ethan swallowed. "Amelia, we can fix this. I can. We can get back together." You still love me, right?" I looked at him. In a single second, 1,000 memories danced by. The nights I cried in silence. The days I was insulted about my own body. His cutting words. Jessica's presence. the scent of a strange perfume on his collar. And finally, the morning he laughed while I sobbed over another negative pregnancy test. And I knew the answer. No, I said clearly, not even a little bit. Ethan trembled. Suddenly, Jessica rushed in. I don't know how she got to the 8th floor. Ethan, what's taking you so long? She covered her mouth when she saw everyone, especially me at the head of the table. I heard the doctor who had examined Jessica call from the corridor. Miss Vance, your follow-up results are in. We need to talk about the drop in your hormone levels and the possibility of... Jessica turned pale. All the directors were silent. Ethan looked at Jessica. Jessica looked at Ethan. Their hidden panic turned into a massive anxiety. I stood up, adjusting the name badge on my chest. I'm done for the day, I said. Continue the meeting without me, Miss Collins. The directors stood slightly, giving a subtle nod of respect. Liam looked at me and nodded as if to say, I'm on your side, always. I walked towards the door. Just as I passed Ethan, he called out one last time, You can't just leave me like this, Amelia. I will. I stopped without turning around. If you try to spread slander or attack my reputation, I said calmly, I have the medical records, the paper trail, and evidence far stronger than your words. Ethan's body went limp. The words medical records alone were enough to break what little courage he had left. I started walking again. The elevator doors opened. Liam held the door before I stepped in. Doctor. His voice was low. I looked at him. There was something in his gaze. Sincerity. Not pity, not cheap sympathy, but appreciation. I just said, I just let the truth be the truth. The elevator doors closed, and behind them, I knew one thing. Today, I closed the door on someone who had never truly seen me. And tomorrow, the first act would truly begin. The court hearing, where all the truths would stand without being pushed down again. The day of the hearing arrived under an overcast sky, as if even the heavens knew something was about to collapse today. I stood in front of the family court building in the most neutral outfit I could find. A plain white shirt, a straight black skirt, my hair tied back neatly. No jewelry, no symbols of power. I came as Amelia, a woman who had finally chosen to stand up for herself. Ethan was already on the courthouse steps, pacing back and forth while clutching a worn-out folder. Jessica sat on a long bench nearby, her face gaunt without the thick makeup she usually wore to show off on social media. The belly she had been so proud of yesterday didn't seem as large as she'd claimed. I noticed the way she held her stomach was more of a habit to hide her shame than to protect something. As I approached, Ethan called out, Amelia, we can still settle this amicably, right? I didn't stop, didn't speed up, didn't slow down. I just walked straight toward the courtroom. Behind me, his voice called out again, more panicked. Amelia, did you hear me? I didn't turn around. The courtroom was cold, the lights white, the chairs hard. But the tension that filled the room was far more piercing than the cold air from the AC. The judge sat upright. The court clerk typed quickly. On the right side, I sat with my legal counsel from the hospital, though I didn't really need them. On the left, Ethan sat restlessly, while Jessica chose to sit in the back row, hiding her face from people's gazes. The hearing began. Ethan's lawyer stepped forward with an overly fabricated confidence. Your Honor, he said, my client wishes to assert that his marriage fell apart not due to infidelity, but because the wife was unable to provide children, was cold, and was too preoccupied with her own affairs. The judge looked at me. I remained calm. Ethan's lawyer continued. We also wish to file that our client is entitled to a majority of the shared assets, as he was the one who supported the household. I almost smiled. Then it was my turn. My lawyer stood with a neat folder full of evidence. No emotion, no dramatization, just facts. Your Honor, we have several relevant pieces of evidence. First, regarding the claim that my client is barren, he opened a folder. Inside were lab results, ultrasound reports, hormone records, all under my name. He handed a bundle to the judge. The judge read it quickly, his eyebrows raising slightly. Next piece of evidence. This is the result of Mr. Collins's examination, conducted at a medical facility several months ago. The results indicate that the fertility factor issues lie with the male party. Ethan's lawyer immediately stood up, shouting, "That's inadmissible. My wife must have forced me." The judge banged the gavel once. Silence. "Wait for your turn to speak." Quiet returned. My lawyer continued, his voice still flat. "Next, evidence of the affair chats, recordings, and photos of my client with a third party, which have been verified by the hospital's digital forensics department." Ethan's voice cracked. "That's a lie. That's just—" "Mr. Collins," the judge said, exasperated, "if you cannot remain silent, I will have you removed from the courtroom." Ethan froze. My lawyer closed the final and most relevant folder. "Your Honor, we also have an expert witness who examined both parties, Dr. Peterson." Dr. Peterson entered in his white coat, walking elegantly as if the room were a stage for the truth. He was sworn in, sat down, and then gave his testimony in a firm voice. "The examination I conducted on Dr. Hayes showed a good fertility condition. Meanwhile, Mr. Collins's examination results showed several low and unstable sperm parameters." Ethan looked down, his shoulders rising and falling. Jessica covered her face with her hands. The judge nodded, taking notes. There was no rebuttal that could withstand medical facts. Then it was time to discuss the evidence of the affair. Chats between Ethan and Jessica were projected. Voice messages were played. Photos from dinners, meetings at hotels in a neighboring city, and phone recordings were heard clearly. "Just wait until she gives up, Jess. Half the assets will be mine. After that, we'll live the good life." The courtroom froze. Ethan's lawyer covered his face, embarrassed that his own client had trapped himself with evidence. Jessica shivered. And Ethan, the man who had once belittled me as a useless wife, sat like someone awaiting a death sentence. I looked at him, not with hatred, but with no feeling at all. The vastness of the truth made revenge feel small. The judge finally made his decision. With clear evidence of infidelity, repeated humiliation toward the wife, and supporting medical facts, the court grants the divorce petition from the wife. Ethan closed his eyes. It wasn't over. The right to shared assets is minimally granted to the husband, as he is the party at fault for the breakdown of the marriage. Jessica gripped her knees, her body trembling, and finally, all claims regarding the wife's infertility are declared baseless, as medical results show otherwise. Ethan looked up at the ceiling as if help would come from there. None came. The judge banged the gavel. "Court is adjourned." I stood up, taking a long, deep breath. Not of relief, but like I had just set down a heavy burden I had been carrying in silence for so long. When I walked out of the courtroom, the evening breeze hit my face. The world felt brighter, more spacious. My lawyer said his goodbyes. Dr. Peterson patted my shoulder and said briefly, "Congratulations, Dr. Hayes. Today, the truth stood on the right side." I nodded, my eyes watering for a moment, not out of sadness, but out of a sense of humanity. On the steps outside the building, someone was waiting, Liam. He wore a simple shirt, hadn't brought a fancy car, and wasn't trying to steal the spotlight. He just looked at me in a way Ethan never had in my entire life, with respect, not a sense of ownership. "May I buy you lunch?" His voice was calm. I looked at him for a long moment. I had just realized how different it felt to be seen by someone who didn't measure a woman's worth by her womb. I nodded slowly. "Yes." Liam smiled faintly. He didn't hold my hand, didn't demand anything, just walked beside me, as if to say, "You're not alone, but you still don't need anyone to stand." Behind us, Ethan came out of the building. His face was blank, his steps unsteady. Jessica chased after him, crying, calling his name. But Ethan just stood on the steps, watching me from a distance. Not angry, not threatening, not blaming, just defeated. And for the first time, I felt that I wasn't the one who had been left. I was the one who was leaving, with my dignity intact, the truth in hand, and a new life ready and waiting. A few months after the hearing, my life felt like a room that had just had a large window installed, bright, spacious, and full of fresh air that could never enter before. I returned to work with my true identity, not as a wife forced to be a shadow, but as a doctor who stood on her own knowledge. That morning, I walked into the hospital with a confident stride. The name Dr. Amelia Hayes, MD, FACOG, was back on the doctor's directory board. The nurses greeted me with respect, not because of my title, but because they knew I always treated every patient with the same empathy as before, even when my own heart was full of wounds. Now, my wounds had healed. All that remained was determination. My schedule for the day was packed. Infertility consultations, a minor surgery, a department meeting, and then an evaluation of a new program we were building. This program had been my dream for a long time, a clinic that educated couples about fertility, not just blaming the woman, as was so often the case. I had just finished a consultation with a young couple when Miss Collins entered my office with a tablet. "Dr. Hayes," she said softly, "the fertility education program you created is showing a drastic increase in engagement. Many patients feel it has helped them." I smiled, not with pride in myself, but for the women who were brave enough to seek answers, no longer bearing the weight of social judgment alone. "Thank you, Miss Collins," I replied. "Let's keep it up." She nodded and left. A moment after the door closed, there was a soft knock. Liam. He came in holding 2 cups of coffee. "Heard you didn't have time for breakfast," he said lightly. I laughed a little. "Do all these case meetings make you curious about my meal schedule?" He placed the 2 cups on my desk. "Not curious," he said with a small smile, "more like making sure someone I admire doesn't collapse from forgetting to eat." I paused for a moment. Words like that used to feel like a threat, because Ethan always used them to wrap his control and manipulation. But from Liam, it was different. There was no pressure, no demands. "No, I know better than you. Just quiet care." "Thank you," I finally replied. Liam sat for a moment, glancing at the presentation folder open on my desk. "The hospital expansion meeting is next week. Are you ready?" he asked. I nodded. "Ready. This time, I'll be there as my true self." Liam looked at me for a long moment, his gaze serene. "That's the most incredible thing you've ever done, Amelia." There was a comfortable silence. Before he could say more, there was another knock on the door. The head nurse came in with a panicked expression. "Doctor, there's someone who wants to see you in the front lobby." I frowned. "A patient?" The nurse shook her head slightly, her voice low. "No, doctor. But it's best if you see for yourself." Liam and I exchanged a look. We walked to the hospital lobby. From a distance, I saw 2 figures standing there. 2 figures who once thought this hospital was no place for me. Ethan and Jessica. I slowed my pace, not out of fear, but out of surprise that they dared to come back after everything that had happened. Ethan looked completely different. His hair was messy, his face was thin, and his eyes were red as if from lack of sleep. He was no longer wearing expensive shirts, just a wrinkled t-shirt and a worn-out jacket. Beside him, Jessica stood with a blank expression. Her stomach was flat. There was no trace of pregnancy, no glow of victory, just the shadow of someone who had lost her way. When they saw me, Ethan immediately took a few steps closer. But he stopped when Liam moved half a step in front of me, maintaining a distance without touching. Ethan lowered his voice. "Amelia, I'm sorry." There was a pause. The sounds of the lobby seemed to disappear. All that could be heard was Ethan's trembling breath. "I was wrong. I was stupid. I didn't know what I had until I lost everything." I looked at him, not with hatred, but with a distance that could no longer be bridged. Jessica looked down, her voice breaking. "Amelia, about the pregnancy. I raised my hand gently, stopping her. "You don't need to explain anything." They were both surprised. "I'm past the point where you have the power to hurt me," I said, my voice soft but firm. "Now, you are just a part of my past. Not a wound, not an enemy, just the past." Ethan shed a tear, the tear of a man who finally understood what it meant to lose something that couldn't be bought back with money, prestige, or manipulation. I continued, this time more flatly. "If you came for medical help, please register. This hospital serves everyone without discrimination." Ethan nodded quickly, as if that were the last hope in his life. But I added a sentence that made them freeze in their tracks. "If you came to get back what you threw away, I'm sorry. I am no longer a woman waiting to be valued." Jessica sobbed. Ethan closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I turned to the nurse. Please help them if they wish to register. Treat them like any other patient. The nurse nodded. Liam and I walked away. But before the elevator doors closed, I caught a glimpse of Ethan looking at me with empty but honest eyes. The eyes of someone who had just realized he hadn't just lost his wife, but had lost the chance to be a better man. The elevator doors closed. Liam looked at me. I'm proud of the way you handled them, he said quietly. I smiled faintly. I just chose not to return to a wound that has already healed. As the elevator ascended, I knew in my heart that my life was heading toward its final chapter. A chapter no longer colored by humiliation, manipulation, and sadness, but something warmer, more human, and more worthy. And behind it all, a reality slowly emerged. Maybe for the first time in a long time, I was ready to open a new door, not for anyone else, but for myself. A year had passed since I walked out of that courthouse with my name whole again. The world felt slower, clearer, more breathable. My life no longer moved with the need to prove myself to anyone, but because I wanted to move forward for myself. This morning, the 8th floor conference room was filled with sunlight streaming through the large windows. In front of me, the hospital's directors sat attentively, looking at a presentation screen displaying the title, Hope Valley Integrated Fertility Education Program. The program that was once just a small scribble in my notebook was now an official unit of the hospital, complete with a team of doctors, counselors, and psychologists. Its goal was simple but profound, to teach couples that fertility issues are not a woman's fault, but a journey to be understood together. I stood at the front of that room, now wearing a new white coat with my name and full credentials neatly stitched on the left side of the chest. The white coat I had once kept hidden like a secret. Now I wore it without fear of judgment, without fear of being seen as arrogant, without needing to hide who I really was. The meeting went smoothly. Several directors asked questions, and Liam, now officially a business partner and the hospital's expansion partner, occasionally offered input with a steady and respectful voice. We worked like an old team, even though our professional relationship was only a year old. After the meeting, the directors filed out, leaving just Liam and me in the now quiet room. He stood up, walked slowly to the window, and looked out over the city. Amelia, he said without turning, this program is going to change the lives of many women, many couples. I walked over to stand beside him. That was always the main goal. Liam looked at me, and you are finally in the place that was always meant to be yours. Our eyes met, calm, mature, unhurried. Amelia, his voice was softer now. If you're ever ready, I'd like to build a life with you. But only if you're ready. I will never rush you. The words were simple, but that's what made them feel so sincere. No grandiose promises, no pressure, no hint of, you need me, just an offer and the space to breathe. I smiled a little, looking down for a moment. I don't want to rush, I answered, but I'm not closing that door. Liam nodded, as if that answer was more than enough, and for some reason, my chest felt light. That afternoon, after handling an emergency C-section, I walked out of the operating room with a sigh of relief. A young new mother gripped my hand tightly, her eyes glassy. Doctor, thank you. I thought I would never be a mother, she said softly. For 2 years, my husband's family insulted me, called me barren. If it weren't for this hospital's new program, I probably would have given up. I squeezed her hand gently. Don't ever let people's words become your life sentence, I replied. What defines your life is the truth, not talk. She nodded, crying tears of joy. I patted her shoulder and walked out. On my way to the doctor's locker room, I paused for a moment in the corridor. The afternoon light fell from a large window, reflecting the hospital's logo on the wall. Hope Valley. I stood there, staring at the logo for a long time, until a clear image of my past appeared. The day Jessica pointed at my face and said, "Someone as barren as you doesn't belong in a women and infants hospital." The irony now felt like a gentle breeze passing by without touching me. I touched my chest, right over the embroidered name on my white coat. I didn't just belong here. I was the one who built this place. I was the one who gave hope to thousands of women every year. I was the one who understood their pain and trauma because I had been through it myself, and I became living proof that insults are not destiny, that wounds can heal, that the woman who is blamed is not necessarily defeated. I stepped forward again, towards a new life, towards a new hope. A few weeks later, at an internal hospital event, Liam stood by my side. He looked at me like someone seeing a future he wanted to protect, not possess. As the event was winding down, he whispered quietly, "Amelia, if one day you want to start a new chapter, I'll be here." I turned, looking at his calm face, and for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid to answer. "I know," I said, "and maybe I'm ready to write that chapter with you." Liam smiled. A smile that was warm, not burning. A smile I had never received from anyone before. That night, I went home with a calm heart. Not because there was a new man, not because my past had vanished, but because I was standing on my own 2 feet, stronger than ever before, and from a woman who was once insulted as barren, I had become someone who brought life, hope, and courage to so many other women. I was no longer the victim of my old story. I was the author of my new one. And that story was just beginning.